depressive symptoms went down on 2 meals a day more than on 6 meals a day. And feelings of hunger decreased on 2 meals a day, which was mind-blowing. Like, people, before they signed up for the study, most people were like, I don't know if I can do 2 meals a day. Like, I will be starving.
Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
Hello, my friends, and hello, Alexandra.
Hi, Dotsie.
We have a super incredible researcher on today. And I was thinking about this show with Hana Kahleova, and I was thinking about the work that we're doing in Congress and fighting hard to get what we're calling the campaign Equal Milk for All. So get soy milk into public schools, reimbursable at the same rate as cow's milk, and not needing a milk note, which is a note from your physician or doctor if you don't want to take cow's milk. And it's been quite the journey. And I went to Washington, as you know, about a month ago, and went through a significant amount of meetings with some congressional staff and some Congress people. And really, we've had so far just unanimous support. I mean, we're not trying to get dairy out of schools. That may come in the future, right? But we are just trying to get a healthy plant alternative for the kiddos that dairy makes sick via lactose intolerance, or the plethora of other reasons that many of us know about from listening to this podcast. So as we've been traversing that work, I have an exciting update, because a couple weeks ago, this was presented to the Congressional Black Caucus. About 50 Congress members are in that caucus, and they voted unanimously to support this.
Oh, congratulations.
So that's really, that's huge.
Really, unanimously.
Yeah, I know. It was very exciting news. Our first steps with this are to send a letter to Thomas Vilsack, the Secretary of Agriculture. It really is within his power to fix this problem, right? So we're doing that before we go to legislation. So it is powerful. We have about, we're nearing 100 Congress people's signatures to this letter to Vilsack to get him to correct this wrong, right this wrong. So having this Congressional Black Caucus support this is huge. Because Thomas Vilsack, let's just say, has had some misgivings in his career as it relates to people of color. And so there, as we're traversing this, Dr. Mills and I, Dr. Milton Mills, who we've had on a couple of times, are working on an op-ed that is all about this issue. And we talked about that we were aware that there are many Secretary of Agriculture in history who have been deeply embedded with the meat and or dairy industry. It's obvious that you want to have a Secretary of Agriculture who has a history in agriculture. I mean, that would be part of the job description, I'm quite sure. But also for broccoli or potatoes or beans or soy, it's just consistently their ties and their connections from historically are with meat and dairy, like solely just those two industries, so as we were looking at that and traversing it, and our wonderful researcher dove pretty deep into looking at the last 12 Secretary of Agricultures. So some of this research that our wonderful researcher did came over, and it was almost like reading a soap opera. This one bit about what happened during the Clinton administration is especially juicy. So as I mentioned, over the last about 50 years or so, the meat industry has really grown accustomed to having powerful friends in the upper levels of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. But interestingly enough, some of that changed during the Clinton administration in the 1990s, when Michael Taylor, a lawyer by trade, right? He didn't have any meat industry or any dairy industry background, became the new head of the Food Safety and Inspection Service, which is the USDA's meat inspection arm. He was surprised at what he saw on the telephone in his new office, right? So this is his first day. He comes to work. He's in charge of food safety and inspection. On the telephone, right? So this is Clinton era, right? Remember, this is a pre-cell phone. This is when you have the giant phone in your office and there's all the speed dial buttons. On that telephone, there were 2 of the 5 or 6 speed dials with names by them. One was to the American Meat Institute, and the other one was to the National Cattlemen's Association on speed dial in this office. He said it was really very clear, this is a quote, that the industry was pushing this effort to stop rulemaking, Taylor said. Congressman Walsh from New York, who spearheaded the effort, said publicly, this is Taylor quoted, to us in meetings, that the reason this amendment was needed because the industry felt that its concerns were not being heard clearly enough by me, meaning Taylor, and the Department of Agriculture. In fact, the Washington Post reported at the time that an attorney for the National Meat Association was one of the authors of the Congressman Walsh amendment.
So this is a bill that they had a lot of say in.
It so much so that they wrote it. Right. It's kind of like that's a head on hands thing was happening. So that was especially juicy. And then what we're dealing with right now, this letter to Secretary Vilsack, I don't know if very many people are aware. So he was the Secretary of Agriculture for Obama. And then the Biden administration confirmed in 2021 that Tom Vilsack would be this administration's Secretary of Agriculture. He was called Mr. Monsanto by the media because he took so much money from Monsanto. But interestingly enough, in between these two administrations, so those years, well, obviously when Trump was in office, he went and was the president and CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council. And, his perceived relationship with corporate agriculture has also left rural communities, farmers and workers distressed, as our research showed. So having him back after that job as CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council, I don't know, it seems a bit weighted to me. So it's going to be, let's just say, quite interesting, fascinating to see what he does with this letter from over half of Congress, who say, the letters is basically fix this. We need an alternative. We need a healthy alternative for children that dairy makes very sick. So anyway.
Well, yeah. Dotsie, your op-ed will hopefully expose his bias so that he will work hard to show that he's not biased and that he actually cares about kids more than his former ties, his ties.
Right. And it's again, it's not taking dairy out of schools. So it's just the fair and just and right thing to do, because certainly, especially people of color, 75 to 98% of these kids are made sick. It's also, and I think we've mentioned this before, but in doing that research in understanding the food waste inside of schools, a USDA report itself found that the milk in 2019 that were served in public schools, 30% of it was like 29.8% of it was wasted. The kids threw it away unopened. So they didn't even take a sip, which tells you they don't like it, or they don't want it, or they know it makes them feel yucky because they're not even opening it. It's just going on the tray and then in the trash. So that alone, I mean, that type of food waste is not okay, however you want to slice it, right?
Well, I can't wait till that op-ed comes out, Dotsie. So you'll have to
We'll keep y'all posted.
Yeah, we'll post it definitely on our Facebook page. So y'all should join our Facebook page to get the inside scoop on what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Let me introduce our guest today, because she's pure science, not corrupted by politics. No. So she's been on the show before. Let's get to it. Dr. Hana Kahleova is the Director of Clinical Research at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. You may remember her from episode 93, where we talked about keto diets, cold theory, and much more. We're really happy to have her back. Dr. Kahleova earned her doctorate in nutrition and diabetes and her medical degree from Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. Fast forward, and she's published more than a dozen nutrition studies. She's the author of Vegetarian Diet in the Treatment of Diabetes, and she also wrote the chapter about eating a plant-based diet to treat diabetes in the book Vegetarian and Plant-Based Diets in Health and Disease Prevention. Today, we're going to catch up with Dr. Kahleova and learn about her latest life-saving and changing research. Hana, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So let's start off. You direct research studies at PCRM, and you've been researching recently the effects of diet on insulin resistance. And we've had many guests on the show before, like Cyrus Kambata and Drew Harrisburg, who are type 1 diabetics. And we've had people, a lot of doctors, explain to us about type 2 diabetes. But I just want to go over again, and forgive me for all the people who've listened to all those shows and have heard it, but I just think it's so important that we get an explanation of insulin resistance right at the top, because we'll be discussing it as we discuss your research. So can you explain what insulin resistance is, and then we'll talk about what you learned from your studies?
Absolutely. It's such a fascinating topic and important for all of us, not only for people with diabetes. Because as we age, we tend to put up some extra pounds that we don't need, and that's associated with insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance is when your body produces enough insulin to cover your body's needs. Your pancreas will take care of that. But for some reason, your body is not responding to that insulin that well. It's like insulin is this gentleman opening the door for glucose to come in and do all the metabolic magic and all the cooking. But at some point, the door lock is jammed and insulin is not able to open the door. And when glucose is not able to come into the cells, then it will build up in the bloodstream, and that's why we have a high blood sugar. That's how we are diagnosed with pre-diabetes or eventually diabetes. And it takes at least a decade or maybe even a few decades to develop pre-diabetes or diabetes. But it starts with these extra pounds that we put on as we age. And that's associated with this insulin resistance, which is like a diminished response to insulin that we produce. Now, why is it important to us? Well, if we're resistant to insulin, not only will the blood sugar will be high, and we will be diagnosed with prediabetes and diabetes eventually. But also it just changes our whole metabolism. Most probably this will be also associated with high blood lipids, with extra pounds around our abdomen, around the inner organs. That's called the visceral fat. That's the most metabolically dangerous fat, where we don't need it at all. And not only around the organs, but also inside of them. Fat starts being deposited in the liver, in the muscle, in the pancreas. And this just disrupts the whole metabolism of all these organs. So insulin resistance is, a life or death question. It's really important to understand what drives insulin resistance and what we can do to fight it, how we can improve insulin sensitivity. That means increased sensitivity of the cells to insulin and its action.
So you mentioned something that I think a lot of people don't understand. You said extra pounds will is one of the causes of insulin resistance. How does being heavier cause the glucose not to be able to get into the cells because the insulin is not able to unlock that door to the cells?
Yeah, this is such an important question. Our adipose tissue has only a certain capacity to store fat. Once we exceed it, then fat starts being deposited in the organs like the liver and the muscle and the heart and the pancreas and around the organs in the form of visceral fat. And it just changes the whole metabolism. The extra fat will, inside the cells, will compromise the function of the mitochondria inside the cells. And mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's the most important part, that increases our energy. So if the mitochondria are not working well, we will be kind of tired. We will not feel like doing anything. We will feel like watching TV and eating more junk food, which just, makes things worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. I found it really illuminating, as I wasn't aware, when you were on the show before and we had a conversation about brown fat. And I remember you sharing with us that cold showers, which our friend here, Alexandra, still takes to this day because of that, increasing the brown fat. Do brown fat and white fat have anything to do with this subject matter that we're speaking of now? Like good, bad, do they have an effect?
Absolutely. White fat is, the one that's under your skin. Brown fat is only in small amounts, and you need to really take care of it in order to increase its numbers. We only have like 1 to 2 ounces of brown fat compared with a few, many pounds of white fat. So the more we can shift toward the brown fat, the more we can increase the amount of brown fat, the better. But what we can also do, if we take the right actions, we can also train some of our white fat to become beige, something in between white and brown. And so this is why research is so fascinating and so encouraging. It's not like you've been born with a certain amount of brown fat and you cannot do anything about it. No, it's not true. In fact, you can. Exercise and cold showers. And it turns out that certain foods also activate brown fat. The arginine, which is one of the amino acids found in soy foods and all legumes, and also nuts and seeds, will stimulate your brown fat, also hot peppers and jalapeno peppers for those of you who like spicy foods. So it turns out it is within our power to also, turn up the brown fat and increase the amount.
I remember the jalapenos because I remember going, oh, phew, I love jalapenos. I don't have to take cold showers. Like I to exercise and eat jalapenos in excess. So you're born with a certain amount of brown fat, but you can activate it, as opposed to white fat, which obviously you're born with some amount, but you can really hyper over activate it in a way, since we're so much more when we gain weight, it's the white fat.
Exactly. And it's also, it's not only about white and brown, it's also about the location. Where is it deposited? It's not too bad to have, a certain layer of fat under your skin that, all of us do. But what's dangerous is that if we exceed the capacity of our adipose tissue to store fat, it just starts overflowing to the inner organs and around the organs. And that's where it becomes dangerous for our metabolism.
Okay. Especially around the organs in the belly, right?
Yeah,
the belly
exactly.
So question's going to come up. Okay, we're talking a lot about fat, but I haven't heard a single thing about sugar. And you've been talking for 5 minutes about diabetes. Where does the sugar come in?
Yeah, that's such an important
The sugar we
question.
eat, because you did talk about blood sugar. So there's two differences here.
Yeah, we're talking about diabetes. Isn't diabetes from eating too much sugar? Well, it turns out no. When you look at a meta-analysis published by the Canadian researchers in 2017, they took all the studies that have been published on the consumption of sugar and the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And it turned out that the people who ate the most amount of sugar had a lower risk of developing diabetes than those who ate little sugar. So the high consumption of sugar was associated with an 11% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. This is not to say that sugar is the number one treatment for diabetes,
Right?
But it's
let's be clear.
It's just to say sugar consumption is not the main driver that's driving the diabetes epidemic. But now people may be wondering, well, but what about sugar sweetened beverages? I mean, they're obviously associated with putting on weight and developing diabetes, which is true. And let's look into it more. Like when you look at 1 serving per day of sugar sweetened beverages, it's associated with a 13% increase in the risk of developing type 2 diabetes after adjusting for the differences in body mass index. But now, why is that? Is it because of the sugar in the sugar sweetened beverages? Is it because of the fructose, which has slightly different metabolic effects? Or is it because of the extra calories people consume? In other words, if you were able to control the caloric intake, and if people drank only that many sugar sweetened beverages as, would be within their ideal caloric intake, would sugar sweetened beverages still be associated with an increased body mass index and increased risk of diabetes? It turns out no. An isocaloric consumption of either sugar or even fructose doesn't do anything to your risk of developing obesity or diabetes. It's the extra calories, because it turns out when you drink a sugary beverage, you tend to overdo it. For some reason, when we consume sugar in the form of a beverage, we tend to just increase the caloric intake. People usually consume these as an add-on to their diet, not, instead of consuming something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the extra calories. If you consume extra calories in the form of, fat or something else, another type of food, you may get the same benefits, and you may also be at a higher risk of being overweight. But with sugary beverages, it's just super easy to add the extra calories without even realizing it.
Yeah.
So are you saying that it's not what you eat, it's how much you eat? Even if you eat a high fat diet, is that an issue in terms of diabetes only because it has more calories per gram, and therefore you tend to get heavier? So because I've seen diabetics, type 2 diabetics, who are not fat, although they might be thin on the outside and fat on the inside.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. It's not only about the calories, but the connection between sugar and diabetes is mostly about the extra calories. Like if you overeat on sweets, even though it's sugar, where we said, even though those people who ate a lot of sugar, their diabetes risk was actually lower than in those who ate only little sugar. If you overate, on sugar for a long period of time, you would be at a risk of being overweight and developing diabetes down the road. So the connection between sugar and diabetes is mostly about the extra calories. But you're raising a good point. Is all the food connection only about calories? And the answer is no. It's not the only connection. When we're talking about fat, the main connection is calories again, mostly, because 1 gram of fat has 9 calories instead of 4 in 1 gram of carbohydrate or protein. So that's more than double. And again, it's so easy to overdo it with fat without even realizing it. So that's the number one explanation, the calories.
Okay.
But it's not only about calories. For example, researchers in Sweden gave people muffins for a few weeks, and they were measuring their fat in the liver. And the muffins were like an add-on to their usual diet. So these were extra calories. And what the participants didn't know is that one muffin had sunflower oil as a source of polyunsaturated fatty acids, and the other muffin had palm oil as a source of saturated fatty acids. And those who were eating the muffins with palm oil without knowing which ones were which, their fat increased in the liver compared to those who were eating the extra calories in the muffins with sunflower oil. So it's not only about calories. It also depends on the composition. Saturated fat will do much more harm, with the same amount of calories compared with other fat.
Okay.
And to be clear, this is type 2 diabetes, which is
Yes.
different from type 1 diabetes.
Absolutely. We're talking about type 2 diabetes. We're talking about the weight control, how to make sure that we stay slim as we age, because as we age, it becomes more challenging. Even vegans and vegetarians tend to put on some extra weight as we age, but the rate is much slower compared with non-vegetarians. So, being vegan is one of the best things you can do for your weight management. But still, some people may, come to a point where they need to make some additional considerations in addition to being vegan.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point you bring up about people tend to put on more weight as they age. Do we know if that is just very strictly because maybe they become less active, or does your metabolism generally slow just as you are in your aging years?
Yeah,
or is it a combo or?
That's such a great point and such a great question. Like, is it the genes in other questions, or in other words, or is it what we do? And it's both. And obviously we cannot change the genes, but we can change what we do. And so, as you pointed out, Dotsie, people tend to be less physically active. They tend to seek more of the sedentary behaviors as they age. The changes in their sleep-wake cycle also, like once they don't go to work anymore, the whole lifestyle changes, right? And becomes much more passive for many people instead of being active. And that's usually associated with changes in the dietary behavior as well, without even realizing it. And before you know it, you put on, some significant amount of weight and need some help. Okay. So in order to fight it, we need to be really determined, and we need to be well informed.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we do have control over it, and it's not inevitable for us to gain weight. Because I hear a lot of people just say, oh, I'm just getting older. Mm-hmm. And they feel like they can't do anything about it, but you're saying that we can.
Yeah, and to touch on this, that's exactly why we conducted a study for people who are aging. So these were people in their 50s and 60s. And that's exactly what they said. My metabolism is just so slow. Like, can you do something for me? And we put them on a low-fat vegan diet for 16 weeks, and we measured their metabolism. And guess what? On a low-fat vegan diet, their metabolism speeded up by 14% in 16 weeks.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. Their mitochondria started working better, right? We're talking about this extra fat being dissolved in the cells, being dissipated, and that's how the mitochondria can start working better. And the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. All of a sudden, people were having more energy. Their skin was clearer, their sleep was better, and they felt like doing more exercise also. They were like, oh, I feel so much energy now.
Yeah, I get the energy and the sleep, but what's the mechanism to plants actually speeding up your literal metabolism up to 14% more? Yeah. Like, what is happening? Besides, you mentioned the mitochondria. Is there any, but the mitochondria has an effect on that metabolism? Very much so?
Absolutely. Okay. When you eat a meal, you not only eat a meal for the satisfaction and for being filled up, but you also start feeling warmer. So Alexandra, when you're cold, one of the ways how to warm up is to eat a meal, right? We know that in the winter time, we just warm up after a meal. And that's called the thermic effect of food. That's the release of energy in the form of heat once we eat a meal. And now the cool part is that not all calories are created equal, and not all calories will exert the same amount of the thermic effect of food. So let's say you eat a low-fat meal compared with a high-fat meal. The low-fat meal will release more energy in the form of heat. So we'll have a larger thermic effect of food compared to the high-fat meal. So like keeping the fat content in the diet low is one of the ways how to get rid of the extra calories, if you will. Because wouldn't that be nice if we could just eat anything we wanted and we would just burn the extra calories in the form of heat? They would just disappear. We would just feel warm, but we would get rid of them. And that's exactly the principle. So the low-fat content of the diet is one of the ways we can ensure that. Another one is
sorry to interrupt. It seems counterintuitive that your body would work harder on a low-fat diet than a high-fat diet.
Not harder, more efficiently.
Okay.
That's the thing.
More efficiently. Okay.
Does it have anything to do with the volume, right? Like if you turn to a more whole food, I know when I did, like my plate had 3 times as much volume of food, was still maybe the same amount of calories or even a slightly less. And I could feel, you know, the body's got to burn through 3 times the amount of food than a tiny little steak and a French fries or something like that.
It's not only about the amount, but also about all the cells, like you have whole grains. It takes so much energy for the body to somehow get into the grain, and you will not even get all the energy from the whole grain. Some of it will be just, excreted from your body without being touched too much, So that's another principle. The more whole food plant-based diet is, the less disrupted all the cell membranes, then, the better for your metabolism, the better for your weight management.
Mm-hmm. I want to just go back to diabetes for a quick moment, because every time I hear you speak, this happened the last time you were on, we get a lot of facts, but we also, I start to feel so empowered. Like this, what you eat matters, and you can completely turn, disease around, and you can turn your life around. And then this is how and why. So I'm wondering with diabetes, so obviously the general public thinks it's all about blood sugar, because you monitor your glucose, right, to see what you need to eat next, or if you're getting into a danger zone. And a couple of years ago, continuous glucose monitoring came out, which seemed to really help people with them to prick themselves, multiple times a day. But it's so focused on glucose monitoring. So is there anything else that people should pay attention to, or can pay attention to, or be aware of, or monitor or measure, besides just glucose, that would help them to balance, or to, find a route out of being plagued, if you will, with type 2 diabetes?
Absolutely. This is such an important question. I'm so glad you asked. In both in the treatment and also in the prevention of diabetes, blood sugar is just one of the markers. Another one is your blood lipids. How's your total cholesterol, and how's your LDL cholesterol? The next one would be your body weight and your body mass index, but also your waist circumference. That's an important marker also.
Because it shows how much fat is around the organ.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Somebody's listening. I missed that. Okay.
That's why they call it a metabolic disease, right? Because it's not just blood sugar, it's your entire metabolism together.
Exactly.
Okay.
And another one is your blood pressure. That's something to be monitored as well. So if you do all of these, those are the most important ones. You will capture them all.
And they all have an effect on how well your body handles sugars. I don't want to say sugars, because that'll get everyone back into the sugar thing. It's, let me phrase it differently. It will help people's body be able to handle the food that they eat as it metabolizes. Is that a better way to put it, instead of just focusing on sugar?
Get the energy out of the food into the cells that need it, instead of being just, stored in the bloodstream where it's not that useful and where it can do more harm. And when we mentioned all of these symptoms like high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high blood lipids, high body mass index, and high waist circumference, we're talking about the metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of all these symptoms together. And people with a metabolic syndrome have a much higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, but also cardiovascular disease. It's just a marker of your overall cardiometabolic health. Your cardio, that means your heart. Metabolic, that's your metabolism, because both of these go together.
So your research is about the effects of diet on insulin resistance. What else have you learned about diet? And you talked to us about fat content and whole foods and non-animal foods. What about timing and the timing of foods and intermittent fasting?
That was a separate study.
Okay.
We published the study in 2014 in the Journal of Diabetologia, which is one of the leading journals in diabetes care. And we did a study with people with type 2 diabetes. And in a random order, people with diabetes are, generally speaking, recommended to have multiple small meals a day. Right. And so we took the usual regimen for people with type 2 diabetes, 6 small meals a day, and we compared it to only 2 meals a day, big breakfast and a big lunch, with the same calories, the same diet composition. And in a random order, these participants with type 2 diabetes started either with 2 meals a day or 6 meals a day, and they were on the regimen for 12 weeks. And then they switched and they did the opposite for another 12 weeks. So that means that each participant went through both, and we were able to say, for you specifically, this one works better. And for the whole group, the 2 meals a day worked much better than the 6 meals a day, not only for body weight and for insulin sensitivity, but also for liver fat. Their liver fat decreased significantly on 2 meals a day, more than on 6 meals a day. And what was surprising, that also their depressive symptoms went down on 2 meals a day, more than on 6 meals a day. And feelings of hunger decreased on 2 meals a day, which was mind-blowing. Like, people, before they signed up for the study, most people were like, I don't know if I can do 2 meals a day. Like, I will be starving. And I'm like, yeah, that's up to me. Like, if you're willing to trust me, just like, let's go through it together. And in a few days, it takes an adaptation time, because if you're used to eating dinners at a late time, your body will automatically get hungry at those times when you're used to eating, right? But if you break the cycle, after a few days, your body just adapts to whatever else you're up to. Like, you want to do 2 meals a day, you can totally do it. Your body will automatically feel more hungry in the morning. Your breakfast will be larger, and guess what? Eat breakfast like a king. Our ancestors were smart, so your body will do the right things and you will be healthier as a result.
Is there a crossover for people without diabetes, 2 meals a day, or do you not know, because it was only studied on the diabetics?
We did this particular study only in people with diabetes.
Right.
But I did another study. I analyzed the data from the Adventist Health Study 2 with more than 50,000 participants who were followed for more than 7 years. And we were looking at generally healthy people. And we were looking at the rate at which they were putting on weight and the intersection between how many meals they're eating and what's the risk of them putting on weight as they age. And what we found was really fascinating. We found a linear relationship between the number of meals and how people were putting on weight. So we took 3 meals a day as a reference. And people who are snacking, who are eating 4 or 5 or 6 smaller meals a day, they were just putting on weight like crazy compared to those who were eating 3 meals a day.
Now, did they have the same calorie?
No, not at all. But we adjusted for caloric intake. That was across the 50,000 people. They had completely different diet. You know, the Adventist Health Study 2 has more vegans and vegetarians than the general population, but there's about half of the people in the study who still eat meat, although the amount is much lower than in general population. About once a week would be the average for the meat eaters in the study. So the meat consumption was much lower than in general public. And, you know, but the dietary practices varied across the board, but we adjusted for caloric intake. That's important.
So same calories.
Yeah.
It does feel counterintuitive because it feels like every time you eat, you're revving up your metabolism because it has to do work to digest.
Yeah.
But
so
at the same,
Can I just summarize to make sure I understood? So people who ate more meals, you found that they tended to eat more calories, but even when you adjusted for having more meals, and what did you do? How do you do that? Do you tell them you can't eat as many calories?
No, you put it in the model, in the statistical model. You adjust for caloric intake.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you adjusted for caloric intake, and you still found that eating more often causes weight gain regardless.
Exactly. Exactly. And we had quite a large group of people who were eating 2 meals a day in the study. They were doing better than those who were eating 3 meals a day. So 2 meals a day were really better for weight control than 3 meals a day. And now your question was really important, Dotsie. How in the world, like your body needs to do some work each time you eat.
Right.
That's true. But guess what? When we're talking about the thermic effect of food, it turns out that the larger meals, like if you ate 6 times a day, and then the next day, you ate the same food in only one sitting, like you had just one large meal. The one large meal results in a larger thermic effect of food than those small meals.
Because it's the same calories, so it just does a whole ton of work in one time versus little work 6 times.
My understanding is that it's the amount of time that you have a high sugar in your blood and that insulin has to be excreted, that can often be a reason that your body stores fat.
Yeah, exactly. It's not only your blood sugar, it's also your blood lipids, you know, whatever you eat. So the fasting state is just like a healing process for the body. If you're fasting for at least 12 hours a day, this has significant beneficial effects on your metabolism. It gives your body enough rest, and it kind of helps it reset each day. So yeah, having these fasting breaks is really helpful for the metabolism.
Have you ever done a study that looked at the optimal amount of fasting? Because Some people like to do 16-hour fast. Some people like to do just fast completely for several days, or every few months or once a year they do a 7-day fast. What have you found is the healthiest equation?
Yeah, there's so many ways how you can get the benefits of fasting, and each of the ways you mentioned is definitely beneficial. But you can think about it as, for example, as exercise. Like if you go on a hike only once a week, you'll get some benefits. But I mean, if you can incorporate like some micro hikes every single day, even though they're not that long, maybe you can do 30 minutes, a fast walk every single day, and a longer hike over the weekend, you will get many more benefits. And with the intermittent fasting, it's the same. You can do just 1 day a week or 1 day a month, but if you can find a way how to incorporate it on a daily basis, that means, for example, if you want to give it a try, you can start eating a large breakfast and a large lunch, being about 5 to 6 hours apart, which would give you an 18-hour fasting window. And, if you do it every day, you get many more benefits. Or even if you do it like twice a week or 3 times a week, you will get many more benefits than doing it just like once a month.
Now, one of the things that a lot of folks say is that that their easiest time to fast is actually when they wake up, because if they eat breakfast, then they tend to get more hungry. I've heard that a lot, Dotsie. I don't know if you've heard that, and Dr. Kahleova, I'm sure you have.
Absolutely.
And here you are recommending that we eat earlier in the day. So it's much harder, but are there still benefits if we choose to have our first meal at noon or 1 and then our second meal later?
You still get some of the benefits, but not all. Like if you want to optimize it, then you really need to start with a large breakfast. Breakfast is the meal that just jumpstarts your metabolism. It aligns your body clock. We have 2 body clocks. One is in our brain, and it's entrained by light and darkness. But the peripheral clock is in each organ of our body, and it needs to be synchronized with the clock in the brain. And the way how we do it is through meal timing and through eating, through the cycles of eating and fasting. So in the morning, you want to tell your body clock, it's morning, it's time to do some work. And that's exactly what breakfast does. It synchronizes the body clock. And the same thing happens in the evening. You stop eating in the afternoon or in the late afternoon because it's getting late, and you signal to your body, there will be night soon. We will get ready for bed. Like we're in another mode than we were in the morning.
Okay.
Wow. Okay. I actually, as Dotsie knows, and as our audience knows, when you were last on, we talked about meals, and I eat sort of constantly. I'm a snacker. I'm like a rabbit. Snacker. And I've always preferred that to eating a large meal. And you also recommended having a break for 16 hours or so, between 12 and 18 hours. And I thought, oh my God, I can never do that. Because I think my break was maybe 9 to 11 hours. And now I am intermittent fasting only because I'm dealing with higher cholesterol. And I have found it easy to not eat until noon the next day. But I think I have trouble at night. That's where I struggle not eating. So now I'll take that next step soon then.
And you'll find it easier once you do the switch. So right now you struggle at night. but once you get rid of the night meals, automatically you will be hungry in the morning. It'll be natural for you to just have a breakfast.
Yeah.
See, that just makes me like feel sad, because like that's the time of day when my husband and I come together, around whatever 6 to 6:30. We usually make dinner together, or he'll sit there and tell me about his day while I make it, and then he has to clean up. It's really wonderful community, and we sit down and we talk about stuff as we're eating, and obviously we could just do all that without the food, but you know how food it is. It does feel like community. It's beautiful. It smells good. It's an experience. Is there? Would there be can you meet me in the middle? And I'm always negotiating on would we just try to focus on doing that at 5 instead of, honestly, it's like 7:15 in the summer, 7:30 sometimes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You can move the dinner a bit earlier, and you can make it lighter. Like, it doesn't mean that you need to skip dinner each single day. You can just move it earlier, and you can make it lighter. Make it the lightest meal of the day.
Ooh,
and for extra benefits, you can add the intermittent fasting and just skip dinner completely, like once a week, if you're up for that.
Okay, I like that.
Where does the microbiome come in terms of, diabetes and metabolism?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. How many hours do we have on the podcast?
Go for it.
It's about the good guys in the gut, but also the bad guys in the gut. And we know that the high-fat Western diet is able to induce changes pretty quickly in the gut microbiome. Those that are seen in diabetes can be induced by a high-fat diet, like in a few days or so. And it's about reduced diversity. So we don't have as many kinds of bacteria. And it's also about some kinds in particular. For example, there's one bacteria which is called Faecalibacterium prausnitzii. It's a complicated name, but this particular bacteria feeds on fiber. And as it feeds on fiber, it produces the short chain fatty acids that have so many benefits. They're beneficial for your heart, for your immune system, for your insulin sensitivity, so that you don't become insulin resistant. It's anti-inflammatory. And so this Faecalibacterium prausnitzii that feeds on fiber and produces all these short chain fatty acids, people with type 2 diabetes have lower count of this particular bacterium. And the lower count is also associated with higher inflammation and higher insulin resistance. So what we did in our study is we put people on a low-fat vegan diet for 16 weeks. We not only measured their metabolism, as I was describing earlier, but we were also looking at their gut microbiome composition. And what we found out was really fascinating. We found out that this bacterium, Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, increased in abundance, compared to their baseline. And this was also associated with their weight loss, with their loss of fat and visceral fat, an increase in insulin sensitivity. So, in other words, it's not in stone. When when you are on a high-fat diet and your gut microbiome is not healthy, guess what? It just takes a few weeks on a low-fat vegan diet to change it.
That's really empowering, because that's a short amount of time. That feels so doable. Yeah. I'm so curious. You've published over a dozen nutrition studies, and as we've been speaking about, your work spans the intersection of diet and disease for the most part. And I'm assuming every study that you do, you start with a hypothesis, what you think might happen. I am curious as to which study results did you end up being most shocked by that went slightly different than you may have hypothesized?
In each study, I'm always just taken aback by the amount of or the magnitude of the changes that I see in people. Like, we have a hypothesis. Yeah, we think a vegan diet might help with rheumatoid arthritis or with diabetes or insulin sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
But then you bring in these people, like, for example, we just finished and published a study for people with rheumatoid arthritis. There were people who were not able to tighten their shoelaces in the beginning. And after 16 weeks on a vegan diet, and it was also like an elimination plant-based diet where we excluded some other problematic foods, such as soy foods and gluten-containing grains, and etc. But anyway, after only a few weeks, like, they were able to do everything as normal, Wow. And when you just see these changes, you're like, it's just more about than about the numbers. It's not only about the numbers. I'm always shocked by the magnitude of change I see in people. And I'm truly inspired by it also. I'm always like, well, if I have someone else, I need to show them this person, with this condition, like how they walked in. It's super encouraging.
Yeah, so it's just the magnitude of the effect.
Yeah.
And the numbers and obviously for quite some time there's been the keto diet, and it's not, doesn't seem quite as hot as it was there for a while, because it's very, very difficult to maintain, it seems to me anyway. I've never done it, but are there actual pros and cons though of being in ketosis? I mean, you can always do a vegan keto diet if you so wanted, but it is extremely high fat and high protein. So pros and cons of putting your body in ketosis.
Yeah, exactly. Most people seek a keto diet for weight loss, and it does result in a significant weight loss. But let me cite a study conducted by Kevin Hall in a metabolic ward, where he compared a keto diet with a vegan diet for 2 weeks each, and then the participants switched. So they did both, on themselves. And on the keto diet, people were losing more weight in the first week, but when you look at the body composition, they were losing no fat. All they were losing was really muscle. So
the body was burning the muscle, choosing to burn the muscle before the fat.
And water too, because carbs will hold water. So
my question to everyone who needs to lose some weight, before they go on a keto diet, do you really want to lose muscle? Like, is that what you're after? Yeah. So
do we know why was the body leaning into directly burning muscle rather than fat in ketosis? Like, what is the mechanism that is igniting?
Yeah. So in the muscle, there's glycogen, which is a storage of sugar, basically. And if you don't have enough sugar, if you don't have enough carbohydrates in your diet, you will start breaking down, all these storage places of sugar, and you will just start breaking down your own muscle.
That makes 100% sense. I didn't realize that it was more muscle loss, but it sure makes sense. It certainly as an athlete, and how much glycogen I would need to take in to keep my muscles firing. A lot of people don't realize, I can't even imagine being an athlete and just eating, protein and fat. Like your muscles literally would not synapse. They would not work. They would not fire. And the other thing is your brain, right? An athlete's bonk, right? When you run out of glycogen for your brain. and you start getting all that super wonky feeling. It's a critical component. And I think I always really find it fascinating when we look at kind of the origin, and a human mother's breast milk has significantly more glycogen than a cow's mother's milk, right? That's higher fat, and we have lower fat, higher glycogen milk in our species. So I feel like when you look back to the beginnings, that really, there's the roadmap that we are a glycogen burning machine as human beings.
I like that.
I wanted to talk about two studies that PCRM is doing and has done. Endometriosis and diet and COVID-19 and diet. In terms of endometriosis and diet, I know you're in the process of that study right now. Am I correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I was surprised. You talked about being surprised at the effect of food on different ailments. I have had endometriosis. I had 3 surgeries for it in my 30s. And I am really surprised that diet would affect in endometriosis. I'm really looking forward to hearing the results of your studies. Can you explain what endometriosis is and why you think diet would affect what's going on in our uterus?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. So endometriosis is a really painful condition. These women just experience periodic pain. Some of them are in constant pain throughout, their cycle. And it's caused by the lining of the uterus not being only in the uterus, but also in other places, such as fallopian tubes or the abdominal cavity or the peritoneum, different places where it doesn't belong to. And it's just super painful. There's no causal treatment. Sometimes hormonal treatment, is being experimented with, or just pain relief and painkillers. But as you pointed out, many women end up doing repeated surgeries without much relief in many cases. And so since we have a few anecdotal evidences, from people like you who told us, well, once I became vegan, all of a sudden my endometriosis improved. We started looking into it, and there may be quite a few links. So first of all, a vegan diet is a low inflammation diet. It helps with inflammatory processes in general. And endometriosis has this inflammatory component to it. So we believe that it may help decrease the inflammation in body in general. Second of all, by affecting all of the cardiometabolic health risk factors, we may be able to improve the hormonal balance as well. And third of all, it's about the so-called AGEs, the advanced glycation end products, which relate to diabetes, but also endocrine conditions such as endometriosis. These are proteins that have been changed through exposure with sugar in our bloodstream. And so they're increased in diabetes, and they're also increased in endometriosis and other endocrine conditions. Now, it turns out that a vegan diet is really low in these advanced glycation end products, because these are a product of our metabolism, but we also consume them in the diet. So when you are on a vegan diet, your consumption of these AGEs, they age you, would be just a simple way to put it. And the vegan diet is low in these AGEs. So this may help like as an additional mechanism. But whether it's true or not, that's exactly what we are testing out at this moment. And if anyone would like to sign up for the study, I'd like them to visit our website at pcrm.org/endometriosis. Just search the endometriosis study at pcrm.org.
So you're looking not to actually stop those cells from going to other parts of the body and
Right.
then
That's
causing
not in
scar
our
tissue.
power.
Right. So it's more about dealing with it when you have and having less pain.
That's exactly right.
Okay, great. Well, I really look forward to hearing the results today. I was a vegetarian during that time. I ate a lot of dairy. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why I had it. I think a lot of women have it and they don't know. I just knew because I had very painful sex because of all the scar tissue pulled down my fallopian tubes. So the penis hit the fallopian, wham!
Yeah.
Just like somebody told me, it's just like getting kicked in the testicles every time a man thrusts inside you. And I was like, and that's why
God.
Dotsie, remember in an earlier episode, I talked about having to have pelvic therapy because of vaginismus. That's why I developed vaginismus. Because, so it can get, and other women have just incredibly painful periods, which I did not have. So it comes in so many different ways, but because it's inside you, a lot of women don't even know they have it. The only way to diagnose this is to be opened up. And actually look. And of course I was opened up 3 times. So so anyway, I'm so glad you're can we move on to something even more sunny, like COVID-19? You looked at the data from the 1918 flu pandemic and found that vegetarians fared better. So you started to examine COVID-19. Can you tell us what you found?
That's exactly right. When you look at the risk of developing COVID-19 and the risk of severe COVID-19, the risk of you being in a hospital for COVID-19, and the consumption of fruits and vegetables, you find out that the more fruits and vegetables people consume, the lower the risk of them developing severe COVID-19. And there was a study in 600,000 healthcare professionals from 6 countries, including the US, that found that those who were on a plant-based diet had a 73% lower risk of developing severe COVID-19 compared to general population. So that's a huge risk reduction. And it inspired me to look at one of the blue zones, Okinawa in Japan. I was like, could it be true for the blue zones also? Let's look at the COVID mortality in Okinawa compared with the rest of Japan. Now, Okinawa is one of the blue zones, has older people, has more centenarians, people who live to at least 100 years, has many more people like that compared with the rest of Japan and compared with the rest of the world. So I was like, well, age is a risk factor for COVID-19. And when I looked at the mortality rates, I was just like amazed. The COVID mortality risk was 16 times lower in Okinawa compared with Tokyo. Although these are roughly, areas with the same population. Of course, living in a city like Tokyo, you're dealing with air pollution and most probably sedentary lifestyle and unhealthy behaviors. But anyway, a huge difference in how you live and your risk of dying from COVID-19. So the blue zones like Okinawa can be an inspiration to us when we're striving for a healthier lifestyle.
Healthier. I went to meet yesterday with the technology company that I used to consult for, and I was meeting with the CEO and the COO. And I went in the building, and at first they I didn't know they wanted full vaccinated, and I'm not. And so I didn't think they were going to let me in. So, well, I'll go back home. We can do this on Zoom or something. Anyway, the CEO said, we'll meet outside or whatever. So I'm outside. He comes out and he's like, "Since when are you an anti-vaxxer?" I'm like, "I'm not at all. It was just for me. Not at all. I just made a choice because I don't have a comorbidity. It's just a choice, but I get it. It's awesome. All of that." So we're sitting there, and they come around to see if we want anything from the cafe. And he said, "I would like a piece of chocolate cake and a Coca-Cola." And I said, "That's why you needed the vaccine." And I did. It was a totally joke, obviously, but I mean, it's a health company. It's like a health technology company. It's nice that we can kind of do that now, as before it seemed like really tense, and we just had a great banter about it. But anyway, so no Cokes and chocolate cake, just in general, right? For you're not going to increase your brown fat with that. You're not going to help your diabetes. You're not
right. Exactly.
Go on and on. Yeah.
What you found was it wasn't just what you eat, but also all the other factors: sleeping, lifestyle, exercise, and things like that, right, Dr. Kahleova?
Yeah, we were focusing on the diet specifically, but all of the other healthy behaviors obviously help also.
Is there anything you'd like to share with us about your research that we haven't asked today?
We are just in the middle of the study for women with endometriosis, and we're about to start recruiting again. So if anyone wants to participate in that particular study, please let us know. We would love to have you. You can contribute to science, and you can improve your health at the same time. And what's coming next? We also improved the lives of women with postmenopausal hot flashes recently. We just published a paper a few months ago, and we want to look into the mechanisms in more detail. So if you struggle with postmenopausal hot flashes, this might be a chance for you also. We will start recruiting for the next replication of the study. We will be looking into why is it that a vegan diet might help with hot flashes. So a lot things going on, a lot things to look forward to. I cannot wait to share all the results with you when the time is right.
We'll definitely have you back on. Thank you so much for being on the show. We so appreciate it.
Yeah, you're such a joy and so empowering, as I said earlier.
Yeah, it's such a joy being with you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Hey, folks. Okay, back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review, and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.